So you can get going, I'll sort of introduce you first. And good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Scotty. What a group. My goodness, a lot of new faces. I think a number of you that have been at either every one of these or at least most of them. I'm Chris Eberhard with CommuniQuest, and I coordinate and sort of facilitate today. And we'll be going around. I always like to take time and do introductions so we know who's in the room, as in no media, right? Isn't that what we always want to know? Is there anybody from the media in the room? But before that, on behalf of SWAHI, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Maples, who's president this year of SWAHI, and she can tell you a little bit more about the organization and welcome you.
Thank you so much, Christine. Good morning and welcome. By show of hands, how many of you are here for the first time? Okay, good. Well, you're in for a real treat. Christine does a fantastic job, and she's been doing this for 15 years now. We were just trying to count backwards, so it's been a very successful workshop, so I know that you're going to just really get a lot out of it. So as Christine said, my name is Jennifer Maples, currently the president of the Southwest chapter, so welcome on behalf of the chapter. My day job, I work at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport in facilities, and I've been there for about 23 years now. But the Southwest chapter has been in existence since about 1979. It came about in partnership with what used to be the California Airports, I forget it. Anyway, it was a California association, but joined with other states, and we became a regional organization. So we've been in existence for quite a while. But how many of you are actually staying for the conference? Because we actually have a conference after this. Okay, awesome. Okay, well, for those of you who aren't going to be staying, you're really missing out. We have a fantastic conference this year. I encourage you to think about it next time. This year, our theme is Cleared for Success, a best practices approach to airport management excellence. So best practices are really at the forefront of our industry right now, and I think it's going to be a fantastic conference. One of the things I want to mention, so this other thing that Christine and CommuniQuest does every year is really awesome, and they provide the centerpieces for our final banquet, which is on Tuesday night, which is awesome because it's always aviation themed. So it's cool. It's like airplanes and really cool things like that, and everybody wants them. So my only disappointment is this year I can't have one because the president gets to decide how they get awarded. And I think you all know, some of you being attorneys, that might be considered a conflict of interest. So I am hoping that it's not a really cool centerpiece this year and I'm not going to feel like I'm missing out. So anyway, but I just want to thank Christine for all that she's done for us over the years. And again, I welcome you on behalf of the Southwest chapter, and I leave you in fantastic hands. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I get that hint. Anyway, thank you so much. Appreciate you coming down early and telling us a little bit. I had forgotten that SWAHI had actually evolved from a previous organization. So, and John, you know. Anyway, so that you know, there are programs in the back if you didn't get. There's also attendee list so that you easily have everybody's names, numbers, and also the biographies of the speakers. SWAHI as an organization has sort of evolved so that I don't have to stand up here and go through, take time to read everybody's bios. So now you have them, and it makes it a lot easier for, I think, everybody. So with that, I'd like to know a little bit about what all of you do. We do have quite a few folks that are new. So what we usually do is just take a few minutes, go around the room, and say who you are, your organization. If you want to add one of the reasons that you're here, something that's going on in your organization, airport, whatever, that's great too. But I'll start here with Steve.
Steve Brown, I'm director for Santa Maria Public Airport District.
Chris Astert, the general manager for the Santa Maria Public Airport District. I've attended many years, and I just like to bring board members and district council to stay up on current events.
John Pfeiffer, retired FAA. Last position in the FAA was manager of the San Francisco Airports District Office. Retired from them in 2001 and then worked with AOPA for 15 years and retired again in 2016. I'm still active on the Association of California Airports Board of Directors, the Nevada Airports Association Board of Directors, and SWATE's Legislative Committee.
My name is Mark Batista. I'm an airport land use commissioner from Tuolumne County. Used to work for several airports and cities in my career before I retired. Mostly I'm here to see old friends and learn a little bit at the same time.
Hello, my name's Carl Miller. I'm a airport board member with Monterey. Been there 13 years, and I think attended this most of those 13 years.
Gary Curcio, I'm on the board at Monterey as well. And just to toot our horn a little bit, we are really thrilled about the great year we've had this year, adding direct flights to Denver, to Dallas, and most recently, Seattle.
Thank you, Gary. If this gets any bigger group, we won't be able to do this, but
Good morning. It's Eddie Angeles, Los Angeles World Airports Legal Division.
thanks, Eddie.
Good morning, Gabrielle Janssens. I'm an assistant city attorney with the city of Livermore, and Livermore Airport is one of my clients.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Quick with Kaufman Associates.
Morning all, Scott Malta. I'm the airport manager for Castle Airport. Call it the biggest little airport in California. I've been here, not quite all of them, but most of them. To some degree, regrettably, this will be my last, as I will be retiring from Castle on the 11th of February and moving to North Carolina, where I will become the airport manager for Moore County Airport. There you go.
Good morning, everybody. Adrienne Patterson, Deputy County Counsel with Solano County. One of my clients will be the Nut Tree Airport, which I'm inheriting from my predecessor, Bernadette Curry.
Bernadette Curry. I am sad to say this may be my last time because I'm handing off the assignment to Adrienne, but I know that we're going to be in great hands, obviously from Solano County. And I do want to put a plug out there is that we are in need of a new airport manager, so stay tuned because Dave Daly has retired, so we will be looking for a new airport manager if anybody's interested.
And I've got to say, number one, have you been to the airport yet? Great. That's one of the questions, those of you, that, one of the reasons when I started this was, airport attorneys, a lot of you, it's just one of your many functions, especially at a county. And so early on, I would always ask, okay, how many of you at the airport manager or you've taken it on yourself to go out to the airport? And it was a little surprising that a number had not. I think now we're up to where most have, and Bernadette, I've also got to applaud because I twisted her arm to come this year. She is always my go-to attorney on sessions and willing, you'll see this afternoon, willing to get involved in a session that is not necessarily her expertise. And congratulations on no longer being deputy, but actually county counsel. That's terrific. So why don't we go over here?
Paula Gell, Johnson, not Monterey, Salinas Municipal Airport Commission.
And I'm Sue Purvis, also on the Salinas Airport Commission.
Diana Sonio, Salinas Airport Commissioner.
Jim Shoemaker, Salinas Airport Commission.
Mitch Hooper, and I do not work for the Salinas Airport Commission. I work for Mead and Hunt.
I'm Richard Forrest, and I work for Salinas Airport Commission.
We'll introduce later. Yes, it's always been great. I think you've been, the Salinas Airport Commission, I believe, has been at every one or virtually every workshop, and it's just so terrific. And now, Monterey Board and somebody else. Yes, to have from Santa Maria. It's really terrific. Bill.
I'm Bill Sabo. I'm one of the elected directors of the Monterey Peninsula Airport Special District and also a member of the Monterey County Airport Land Use Commission. And other than being a professional aviator for 55 years, I don't do anything.
I am Barry DeWalt. I'm the city attorney for the city of Reading, and I was told by Rod that there's an award for attending every one of these since they started. So I'll be picking that up when we're done today.
And I'm Rod Dinger. I got my hair back. And Jim Wadley, Airports Manager, City of Reading.
Wow, I don't know if I can follow that up. Rod Dinger, I'm chauffeur for these two gentlemen, and I'm just here to eat breakfast. Rod Dinger with ADK Executive Search, and I've been to every one, and I'm looking forward to half the award of whatever Barry gets. Okay. Oh, yeah, we got to hit that. Yeah. Yeah, she wins most of the time.
Randy Fife, City Attorney, Idaho Falls.
Russell Melbourne, Contra Costa County Airports, Assistant Director on the operations side.
Hi, I'm Kate Andrus. I'm Deputy County Counsel for Contra Costa County.
I'm Beth Lee with Contra Costa County Airports, Assistant Director for the administrative side.
Jim Lights, Executive Director of the California Airports Council, representing the Part 139 airports in the state.
Good morning. Chris Andres, Airport Administrator for Chandler Municipal Airport in Arizona.
Got a few here from Arizona, which is always great. Go back over.
I'm Damon Anderson from Lake Havasu City, Arizona, Airport Director.
Hi, I'm Judy Krause with Kaufman Associates. My name is Natalie Lackey. I'm an attorney with Adamski, Morosky, Madden, Cumberland, and Green, and one of my clients is the Santa Maria Public Airport District.
Hi, I'm Chris Morello. I'm with Monterey Regional Airport. I oversee facilities, planning, and operations.
And I'm Dave Fitz with Kaufman Associates.
Good morning. I'm Jim Lofton. I'm the Assistant Chief Counsel for Airports and Environmental Law at the FAA in Washington, D.C., and soon to be retired.
Good morning. Phil Dackery, Real Property Manager, County of San Luis Obispo.
And good morning. Shannon Matushevitz, Deputy County Counsel from San Luis Obispo.
Good morning. Mark McClearty, Director, Western Pacific Regions Office of Airports, and I'm very happy to be here.
Good morning. Jorge Rubio with the City of San Diego, the Interim Deputy Director of Airports, overseeing Montgomery Gibbs and Brownfield Airports.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Charlie Broadbent. I'm the Airport Manager of Montgomery Gibbs Executive Airport. Just happy to be here and learn about more of the legal issues that airports are facing, because it seems like there's always something coming up. So just happy to be here as well.
I'm Jim Lasky. I'm the attorney for Friedman Memorial Airport in Sun Valley, Idaho. And after being an airport attorney for 8 years, I'm going to learn what my role is supposed to be.
Oh dear. We did. So we're set. Oh, yep. Carol, Eric, you folks.
Hi, I'm Carol Ford with Ford and Associates.
I'm Eric Peterson with Santa Clara County Airports.
Cole Hartfield, Airport Planner, Sacramento County Department of Airports.
I'm Justin Bolam. I'm the Airport Manager for Catalina.
Wow, what a group, huh? I do that because it's just so impressive, not only the variety, but I'm just so honored and impressed. To move just for a moment, a little bit about myself, because sometimes I get a question. I do public outreach mostly anymore. I used to do all sorts of things, airspace, et cetera, but I now focus on public outreach, facilitation, mediation, and that event planning in a way, so that this kind of comes naturally. I'm so happy to have all of you. You do have a program. If you have a question in terms of the day, we're a very informal group, as you know. Restrooms are right outside the door and to the left. I did my master's thesis at Pepperdine Law School about 10 years ago, and we're clearing out, decluttering our home, and I happened to see that I have left over a whole bunch of booklets on mediating airport issues. So I will put them in the back. There's only maybe 15 or 20 of them, but if it's something of interest, even though it's 10 or 12 years old, the way you mediate and a lot of the issues stay true no matter what. So if you're interested, please take one. Other than that, let's get going. We have a full day and I think some really good sessions, and would first like to introduce, I'll actually turn it over to Lori and she can introduce. Lori Balance, I have the honor of working with, particularly at Monterey, but several different places, and fantastic, I'd say land use attorney, but environmental land use, you have all sorts of hats, and represents quite a few different airports, and again is one that's always willing to help out on giving either an update on land use or in this case on the PFAS. So Lori, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to work with Christine for many, many years. So this morning we are going to talk about probably one of the hottest and most difficult topics that came up last year that all of the airports are grappling with, and that's PFAS. I'm going to let Chris Waller from ALTA talk a lot about kind of the technical side of the equation and explain what this is that everybody's talking about. I also have Sarah Johnson from the California Airports Council with me today, which is just extraordinary to have her with us this morning. She's going to talk a little bit about the state and federal regulatory environment that we find ourselves in, and also a little bit about what airports we're up against this year in terms of testing, monitoring, and what we see coming up. I'm going to fill in, rely heavily on my two amazing experts, but fill in also on some of the anecdotal legal issues that I've seen come up with airports in California regarding PFAS. We do have, I do work with a number of large commercial airports throughout the state, and they've been grappling with this year and into, or last year and into this year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Waller with ALTA, who I work with at Ontario, and he's gonna start us off here this morning. So thank you for coming.
All right, thanks. This on? All right, got me. Hello, I'm Chris Waller. I work for ALTA/NV5. We're an environmental consulting company. I'm also the acting director of the Ontario International Airport. So we had the lovely pleasure of getting a letter from the State Water Board to do a PFAS investigation this year. So we're thrown right into the thick of it with this new emerging chemical. Sure, I'd like to get started. Is the presentation ready to go, or should I grab a flash drive? Perfect. Get my little wand to test here. Thank you. All right, so to get started, just kind of a background on what PFAS chemicals are, polyfluoroalkyl substances. The names are all extremely hard to say. It's better to stick to the acronyms. I've been looking at this for a couple of years now, and I still get them confused, so I highly recommend the acronyms. The two most common that you hear, and most of highest concern right now, I would say, are PFOA and PFOS. Their chemical chains are provided right there. These are all man-made chemicals, manufactured for a number of different items. They're very tough, flame resistant, they last forever. In fact, they get the name forever chemicals because they never really break down. This manufacturing started in the 1940s. It's ramped up a lot until the last few decades, and really they're persistent in the human body, the environment, other creatures, other wildlife. It's a very persistent chemical that once it's ingested, once it's lodged in soil, groundwater, it stays there until it moves to its next host. Voluntarily in the 2000s, U.S. manufacturers started phasing out PFOA and PFOS. That doesn't mean they phased out everything in this category of chemicals. And then they started making new ones, such as these Gen X chemicals, which are similar properties but have fewer proven or fewer observed health effects for now. So here's the family tree of PFAS. As you can see, there's quite a few of them. They all have different specialties. Some are great for fire resistance, some are great for waterproof, others just make things last longer. For example, you throw them in certain permanent markers so that they stay on paper and don't run off quite as easily. So they have all sorts of different uses depending on which one. They all sort of stem from this PFAS general category and then branch out into their different items. Again, we're going to focus on PFOA and PFOS more than the others. These are mostly because they were identified as potential health effects at the earliest, and now they seem to be the focus of many different regulatory levels, and they're basically just the marker for this whole tree of chemicals. All right, so talked a little bit about where they're found. They are all over the place. They are pretty much impossible to avoid at this point. You find them in everyday items, including food packaging, commercial household products, so stain and water repellent fabrics. Actually, the brand name Scotchgard is basically PFAS spray, so that water resistant, fire resistant, anything like that is going to be made out of PFAS. A lot of cosmetics, markers, certain sunscreens, certain insect repellent, things you put directly on your body. All of these can have, well, I wouldn't say all of them can, but there's certain brands, certain types that do have these chemicals in them. Most notably for airports, PFAS are the active ingredients in firefighting foam. Again, we talked about how they are fire resistant, so you mix them with a foaming agent, a little water, you spray it on top of a fire. It's the best technology we have for putting out jet fuel and other airfield related fires. These fluorosurfactants are great at what they do, and the FAA is trying to find replacements as we speak, but at the moment they are the best chemical for putting out fires, which is why they're used in pretty much all of the AFFF that is available. Little graph, kind of hard to see, just kind of shows you how these chemicals evolved. I won't spend too much time on there. The top one, PTFE, is Teflon. That's the material that goes on non-stick pans and things of that nature. It's also the chemical of that new movie, Dark Water. So again, this is becoming more apparent in the public, and it just kind of goes for their manufacturing these back in the 40s. So they've been out there for a while. They're just starting to be identified as a problem. So yeah, the problem got widespread before we realized there may be some health impacts. This pyramid basically just shows what the regulatory agencies were paying attention to. It started with PFOA and PFOS, and then they've been slowly testing their way through the various other chemicals. There's a lot of research on ingestion of PFOA and PFOS, but that's pretty much where the good research stops. Everything else is new, and even in inhalation and dermal absorption have not been well studied, and their health effects are still pretty much unknown on a long-term scale. So how does PFAS get in the environment? This little graphic, perfect for airports. On the left, you see firefighting equipment, crash truck, dispensing PFAS onto a fire, whether it's for training or an actual emergency. It's required by the FAA, so all the airports do it. So you dispense the AFFF onto the ground, and then this can end up in the environment in all these different ways, whether it's direct runoff from the ground into surface water or into the ocean. It can go down through the soil into groundwater and then travel to a drinking water well or over to the ocean that way. It can also end up in the air or in the sediment, which is then eaten by humans, animals. Can trickle down into the sediment of the ocean, where it ends up in invertebrates, which are then eaten by larger creatures. So, pretty much no matter where you are, no matter what type of living thing you are, you've got a potential for ingesting these, whether you know it or not. Yeah, as an environmental manager, I always have great news. You know, usually my topics are always uplifting. So what are the health effects? So like I said, the majority of the research is all ingestion right now, but inhalation and dermal exposure might also have some health effects. A lot of this research is preliminary. It's not well established in humans. Most things were done on animals at this point. But they've noticed a number of different effects. So there's cancer, possible liver effects, effects to fetuses, low birth weight, developmental problems, immune effects, thyroid effects, and then even cholesterol changes. So it's all over the map on this. You know, you don't have the perfect, this concentration of this chemical leads to this increase in, you know, chance of getting cancer. The science isn't that robust yet. They're working on doing more testing, but for the moment they've identified very potential significant effects that are statistically significant, so that sounded the alarm bells. So what are the regulatory agencies doing about it? There's a nationwide EPA health advisory, and that started at 400 parts per trillion and 200 parts per trillion per PFOA and PFOS. That got moved down to 70 parts per trillion. And when you think parts per trillion, think of a grain of sand in an Olympic swimming pool. So really not detectable by any normal manner. They're very small concentrations that may have these significant, potentially significant health effects. California, they go above and beyond, which they usually do. In August 2019, they updated their response levels and notification levels to 5.1 parts per trillion and 6.5 parts per trillion for the two chemicals. So those are extremely low, and those are levels that you find in all sorts of drinking water systems and all over the place. They're very hard to reach or clean anything below that level. In fact, it's even hard to sample down to that low of a concentration. So all of a sudden, these potential safe levels, if you want to call them that, are below the detection limit that a lot of labs can handle. So it's hard to tell whether your water meets this level or not. I will say that these are not enforceable levels. These are advisory levels for the moment. Basically what these mean is that if you have concentrations above these notification levels in your drinking water, then the California DDW and the EPA advise that you clean it up to below these levels. If you serve water above these levels, there's going to be no penalty for now. So it's kind of a gray area on what are we actually supposed to do about this. Here are some states that are taking action. The majority at this point. The others will either follow or just use whatever the EPA does. It's pretty much been a trickle-down effect. Michigan seems to be leading the charge. Michigan and California is getting in gear as well. So here are states with numeric action limits. Again, Michigan and California leading it, as well as Washington, Colorado, and Minnesota and some of the East Coast states. So when you're actually searching or trying to investigate the existence of PFAS, especially at an airport, you're going to check your soil and you're going to check your groundwater. I don't think many airports provide their own drinking water. That's a bit much. So really you're just looking for the existence in the environment. So when you're sampling the soil, you're getting detection limits of 500 parts per trillion. So almost 100 times higher than these drinking water limits that California has set. In water, there are labs and certain methods that can get down to 2 parts per trillion, but as we'll get into in a second, there are a lot of challenges when trying to get down to that concentration. I listed the 2 EPA methods. If you ever get into the weeds on this, those are the newest ones. Depending on which chemical you're looking for, their detection limit ranges from about 0.53 to 16 parts per trillion. So investigation challenges, we've actually started an investigation in Ontario, and we ran into a bunch of different problems. But most commonly, all the materials you usually use for general environmental investigations have PFAS. So your Sharpies, your steel-toed boots, some hard hats, some vests, a lot of the safety vests with reflective materials, and if they have any waterproofing or fire-resistant rating, they have PFAS on them. You can't use any of that when you're taking these samples. And most people don't have an extra set of steel-toed boots. Like if you call your drilling company and say, hey, bring your PFAS-free steel-toed boots, they're like, oh yeah, sure, well, you got it. So you have to give them basically, PFAS-free bags, polyethylene bags to put over their shoes when they're doing this sampling. Not only is the equipment you use covered in it, but the sunscreen can have it, insect repellent, which are oftentimes needed for Ontario Airport. If you're doing sampling in the summer, you're wearing sunscreen. As a partial safety guy, of course, put sunscreen on. And then another problem is the decontamination. Certain chemicals that are used to clean the equipment for normal sampling have PFAS in it. Pumps, well casings, things of that nature. They use Teflon because it's so tough and it lasts so long. It's a great material, but if you're sampling for PFAS using a pump with Teflon, you're getting positive results. Even if the drinking water source is negative, you pick it up on the way up to the sample. Again, there's some of the recommended materials you can use. Everything has to be just recently washed, but not with fabric softener. If you use fabric softener, you get false positives. Rubber, neoprene is fine, powderless nitrile gloves, and then really the best thing to use for collecting samples is the polyethylene. Also, again, when you're rinsing anything off, make sure you use PFAS-free deionized water. I suggest getting it from the lab, not from the gas station. All right, so basically there's been a number of sampling events now, a lot in the last 10 years, most notably at military bases. Now drinking water systems are getting in on it, and other areas including industrial facilities, and California has requested all the airports sample. So here are just some examples of results. I won't walk through all these to bore you, but yeah, 70,000 parts per trillion at a couple Air Force bases. A couple hits in the Monterey Water District. Sorry to call you out if anybody's here from there. And then I thought that one on the bottom is pretty interesting. Florida State Fire College found 270,000 parts per trillion in their groundwater. So yeah, the sampling results have pretty much all been positive. It's everywhere, but it's really the concentration fluctuation that is the big difference. So you want to see your levels in the single digits parts per trillion, not in the 100,000s. And then just treatment, once you find it, there's all sorts of different methods being tried. The biggest thing we've noticed is that cost is usually double for treating PFAS versus treating your normal chemicals, your benzene, toluene, any oil residuals. All these technologies are costing about double to remove PFAS just because it's proving to be a pain to get down to those really low levels. I will say the most proven so far has been reverse osmosis, and what's interesting is you find a lot of the companies that manufactured PFAS until the late, last few years are buying up reverse osmosis companies because they know that's the one that's working the best. All right, so that's what I have for the technical side. Sarah, you want to jump in now, and then we'll do questions later?
So, if anybody has questions for Chris right now in terms of just the background of PFAS, let me know before we move it over to Sarah. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah. So they can do the same testing to get down to that, 1 part per trillion range. I know testing blood is not quite as consistent as testing water. So these drinking water levels that are asking for 5 parts per trillion, if you tried to test your blood for that, it'd be tough to get down to those concentrations. However, in terms of finding it in your body, the concentration is tough to get accurate, tough to nail down accurately, but you can just take a tissue sample and search for it, and if you mostly search for the existence of it, and there's been a lot of testing done on wildlife, and it's coming up positive in almost every sample you try, just depending on the concentration.
Yeah, Carl?
Chris, is alcohol a known antidote for PFAS?
Yeah, it's not super soluble in alcohol, but it really does help relieve the stress related with PFAS issues. It's a proven tactic at the Ontario Airport.
Great question. Yeah.
Have there been any workers' compensation claims filed because of this from fire suppression people on airports or employees?
So that's a little outside of my expertise, so I don't know for sure. I know they're still working out the regulatory side of legal exposure and all that sort of thing, and I don't think there's been any significant ties where this exposure to PFAS was directly related to this population having a health effect. So I don't think we're quite there yet, but again, I'm not entirely tied into that.
Yeah, we'll cover the legal aspects a little bit later, but I agree with Chris. It really is very, it's at the start of what we will see as a balloon of litigation, but it hasn't really blossomed too much yet at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and, Rod?
So Chris, I love the presentation, but when you talk about the products that use PFAS, that, like Sharpies, is there the forever chemical, is it truly forever, or does it have a life of 500 years until it breaks down, like in a landfill, or anything like that, or the studies don't go that far yet?
No, it does technically have a half-life, but it's in the thousands of years. So, in terms of letting it biodegrade itself, it's like asbestos in terms of how long it lasts. So.
Yeah, it's the true forever chemicals, unfortunately.
I just had a quick question. How is it manufactured then? I mean, what is it coming from? How do they make PFAS?
So it's a carbon chain. So like anything, it's produced like a petrochemical. I don't know the exact process. You might watch Dark Water. That's exactly what they talk about. But I think DuPont was a major manufacturer early on, and it's just a processing of a hydrocarbon and then adding a couple of different chemicals on the end of the chain. I don't know the exact chemistry of how it's produced, but it's similar to something the way you'd make certain plastics and other things like that.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and turn it over to Sarah to talk a little bit about the state and federal regulatory requirements and what happened to airports this past year.
Yeah, so I thought now that we have a better understanding, or as best as we can understanding of what exactly PFAS is, it'd be great to talk about what is being done about the chemical. As Chris mentioned, these aren't new chemicals, PFAS, PFOA. They've actually been around for decades. There have been a number of lawsuits and settlements awarded against the manufacturers such as DuPont and 3M, but it really has been kept in the dark, and it didn't come to light until the Michigan water crisis. If you recall, Flint, Michigan, they had a severe issue with their drinking water where they actually found PFAS in the wells, and when they began digging deeper into it, the communities began to see cancer clusters pop up. There were impacts to agriculture, to livestock, and with all of these negative things happening, it really forced the regulators to begin to pay attention, start asking the important questions. What exactly is this chemical? What is it doing to my community? What are the health impacts? What are the environmental impacts? And this wasn't limited just to Michigan. This began to grow into a nationwide issue with all of the media and news coverage on the issue. And this really came into fruition in California, March 2019, through the State Water Resources Control Board. So if you're unfamiliar with California's process, we have the State Water Board. They are responsible for setting water quality standards for the entire state, and they also oversee the 9 regional boards throughout the entire state. So last year, they held a full-day workshop to talk about per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and they had speakers from the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Defense, the Natural Resource Defense Council, all, again, to talk about the background, the impacts, what it's doing to the community. But the most important announcement, at least for us, was that they were going to begin sending out 13267 investigation orders. You're asking, what is a 13267 investigation order? This is actually a reference to California Water Code section that gives the authority to the state and regional board to require technical and monitoring reports of any person or entity that they suspect of discharging or they have discharged waste that will impact water quality within their region. So to put that in layman's terms, they can require technical reporting of any person or entity that they suspect has discharged PFAS into the environment. So from what we learned from Chris's presentation, this loops the airports into the equation because of the firefighting foam, AFFF. This includes PFAS. There are currently no other products on the market right now for airports to use for the firefighting foam. So they're stuck with this currently, but in the last FAA reauthorization bill, the FAA was given the authority to look for an alternative chemical that doesn't include the fluorinated substances. But they have 3 years to identify that new chemical. So I believe until late 2021, they've actually built a testing facility so they can start looking into that alternative. But until then, airports are still using that AFFF with the PFAS in it. And this is a matter of safety for the FAA. There are no other chemicals that can put out a fire as quickly as the AFFF that has PFAS in it. On the State Waters Board's end, this is really when they began to connect the dots. Airports are using AFFF with the PFAS, so they are going to receive these investigation orders. But it's safe to say airports aren't alone. They're actually going through this in a 3-phase process. So the first phase will be with airports with training and fire response sites, drinking water wells, municipal solid waste landfills, and any adjacent systems. So if you have a drinking water well that's within 1 mile of the airport, they're going to be testing that as well. Phase 2 will be primary manufacturing facilities, refineries, bulk terminals, and non-airport fire training areas. So this is really important for everyone in the room. Right now, they're looking at the Part 139 commercial airports, but there is the potential that this expands to general aviation airports as well if you've had any crashes or incidents that required AFFF on your airport. Finally, phase 3 will look at secondary manufacturing sites, waste treatment and pre-treatment plants, and domestic wells. So the important part, or the interesting part of this, is that the State Water Board was the entity to issue the investigation order out to all of the different airports and the water wells. But the regional boards are the ones who will be managing those investigation reports. So they took a top-down approach to sending it out, but the regional boards tend to work independently of each other. They are in their own silos. They'll have maybe a call every other month to talk about their progress, but what's happening in one region can be completely different than what's happening in another region. So it's good for you to have that awareness. So what were the expectations for these technical reports that airports were needing to submit? Initially, the Water Board gave airports 60 days to create a work plan for their facility. And in the work plan, the airport would include a site map with sample locations, PFAS material storage and use areas, probable release areas, including firefighting and training areas, crash sites, and spills from handling. They would identify sensitive receptors, municipal wells, domestic wells, and surface water bodies, propose sampling locations, sampling and analysis plans for that list of chemicals that Chris had on the screen previously, as well as reporting limits for PFAS. After the airports put together this work plan, they send it back to the regional board who reviews this. If they have any questions or concerns, they get back to the airport. It may be a bit of a negotiation process that takes a couple of weeks, but after that's finalized, the airport would then have 90 days to go through that testing process and then submit their final results. Now, when our airports first heard this timeline, there was a lot of concern because this is a very aggressive schedule. 60 days for a work plan, 90 days for testing. And there are a lot of issues to consider. First, many of the airports didn't receive the investigation orders in a timely manner. There were some airports that didn't receive them at all, but the clock was still ticking and time was going down, but they didn't know what they were required to do. The second issue is that not all airports have the same resources as other airports. So let's think of this as your hub sizes. You have a large hub airport that has a very large budget. They probably have environmental staff and access to consultants. Now, if you compare this to a non-hub airport, they're probably going to have to go back to their city or county and ask for funding. They probably don't have environmental staff on hand, so for them to understand what exactly PFAS is and how to test for it is going to be extremely difficult. So that being said, they're going to have to go through the RFP process to go hire a consultant to put together this work plan for them and help with the testing. So our members approached us about going back to the State Water Board rather than them having to go to their individual regional boards and ask for an extension request, because that would get very messy with multiple timelines coming out for each of the different airports. So Jim Lights, the executive director, and I, we met with the State Water Board, and it was actually a very enlightening conversation. Typically, when we go and meet with regulators, they have very laser focus on what they want, and it's very hard to get them off of that pathway. But the State Water Board was very candid with us in understanding that they were moving aggressively, and they still had a lot to learn about the chemical itself and also about the airports which they were trying to put through this testing process. So they were welcome to any of the thoughts or considerations that we had, and it was a very good process overall, and we were able to rewrite the timelines so that we were still cooperating with them. We understand that this is a harmful chemical, but it also gave our airports enough time to get a hold of the resources that they needed to go through the process. So we staggered the timeline. For example, the large hub airports that had all of the resources that they would need, they stuck with the original timeline, 60 days for the work plan, 90 days for the testing. But then for the medium hubs, for example, they would have 90 days to put together the work plan. Small hub would have 120 days to put together the work plan. And from there, if they needed more time for testing and sampling, we would move forward and ask for that extension request. So with all of that being said, I just want to emphasize how expensive this has been for airports going through this process. We have been tracking the costs from the airports that are willing to share the data, and we're seeing numbers in excess of $200,000 for these work plans and testing. And it is regardless of the airport size. I've seen it across large, medium, small, and non-hub airports. There's no funding available on the state level to help airports pay for this cost. And in fact, the State Water Board, the further along they get in this investigation, they're actually going to start charging the airports to reimburse for any work that they do on evaluating work plans, or if there's an additional investigation, the airport will actually have to pay for the cost of the State Water Board's time. So this is something that we're really going to have to look into going into 2020, figuring out how we can help the airports pay for this. I know, Lori, you may talk about some other methods, buyback. I've heard other things about insurance claims, but this is a very, very expensive process. But with that being said, they understand that there is a negative health impact to this chemical, and there's a reason why they're doing all of this. And the first is really public awareness of where the chemical is. The State Water Board is collecting all of the testing results, and they will be posted to their website. You can go there, click a link, and they have a map of California where you can see all of the airports, landfills, drinking water wells, and their relation to each other as far as distance. They will also be posting the testing results so you can see the concentration of PFOA and PFOS that they're seeing at these specific facilities. So this is all going to be public information. Nothing is kept in the dark anymore. In addition, this is also the opportunity for the State Water Board to evaluate whether or not public health goals will be needed and whether or not they need to set a maximum contamination level. So as Chris mentioned, they're going through the testing, they've set the notification and detection levels, but they need to decide whether or not there's going to be a cutoff for how contaminated a specific area can be. And if we do end up going through that regulatory process, we will be heading down a road toward remediation where airports will have to clean up their sites. And again, this is another cost that airports will see, and again, another unknown variable as to how expensive it will be and how they will cover that cost. So as of now, that's what we're seeing on the state level. Again, there was a lot of action on the federal level last year as well. Congress attempted to put language into the National Defense Authorization Act that would have categorized all variations of PFAS as a hazardous substance, but this really puts airports into a gray area because it's going to be a hazardous substance, but you're still required to use AFFF on your airport. So it's very much a contradiction of each other. So that was one of the issues, but also the fact that there is no cleanup process available right now. There's no best practices or guidelines for how to do it. So you'd have a hazardous substance, you'd have a chemical that airports have to use, but then they'd also be trying to clean it up with no clear avenue of how to do it. So again, a lot of resources dedicated to something that is unknown. Fortunately, ACI was very active in pushing back on this language, and they were able to get it off of the table. And I believe last year they ended up putting in much more benign language into the NDAA. And I believe it required the Department of Defense to look at reducing or eliminating the use of PFAS, except for in cases of emergencies like an aircraft crash. And it also dedicated additional funding into research into PFAS and figuring out how to clean up the substance. So a lot of activity last year, fully anticipate to see more regulations and language coming out this year. This is really just the tip of the iceberg, and there's much more to come.
Thank you. I'm going to have Chris just talk briefly about the reporting requirements and what he did for Ontario International Airport in response to what Sarah talked about. And then I'll provide a couple of legal anecdotes, and then we'll open it up for comments.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so Ontario International is a medium hub. So we were in the second wave of all the California airports. That was nice. We got to watch somebody go first, which was helpful. Yeah, but the timeline was extremely tight. We had to ask for extensions on both the work plan and the testing. We'll get into why on the testing. But the work plan, they asked to do shallow soil samples and groundwater samples for every area of potential AFFF use. And we're talking about an airport that goes back 7 decades. And it just changed hands 3 or 4 years ago. So we were like, what are we, poking holes everywhere on the airport? And we're shutting down the runway to make sure we get the right samples. So we decided to take the approach where, well, we know where it's stored and we know where the training's been for the last decade. And then we also know one area that was used as a training ground in the 80s and then 90s and then got stopped in the early 2000s. We're like, okay, well, we'll try those 2 spots. Those are the 2 heaviest use areas. We'll say that's the representative worst case scenario. And luckily, the Regional Water Board agreed to that. So Ontario avoided doing any sampling on the runways. There were some samples in the AOA, but only on near the fire station and around the service road, nothing that altered any aircraft operations. So the investigation involved taking shallow soil samples, so 0 to 20 feet in the usage and storage areas. We ended up poking about 15 holes in 2 different areas, just using a geoprobe, pretty simple. But groundwater at the Ontario airport is 250 feet down, and it's not an easy soil to drill and create wells. It's not great for that. So we were looking at multiple months of drilling down to get to the right area. Ontario got extremely lucky that there was a former contaminated site on airport property just down gradient of the storage and training areas. So those had existing groundwater monitoring wells, that did not have Teflon in them. So we got lucky that they were old enough that Teflon wasn't used in the wells, and they existed. So that, that cut costs by about 75%. So Ontario got lucky in this instance. However, there were some challenges using those wells because they were a different entity's monitoring wells, and that entity was not very excited about us going into their monitoring wells and sampling for new chemicals. The court just got closure. Please leave us alone. We don't want to go in there and clean up anymore. So we talked them into it. They still have quarterly monitoring that's required for their past contamination. So when we went to go do the sampling, we learned that their quarterly monitoring takes all quarters. So they had each monitoring well set up with a pump and a sampling bag that was slowly bringing water in over the quarters. So we had sampling scheduled for the middle of December. We mobilized, we went out there, we opened them up, and we realized we had to wait until first week of January for the other entities' sampling to be done. So we immediately called the water board and hey, so that report we said we'd have done first week of January is not going to be ready till the end of February, and had to explain why. Interesting conversation, but at the end of it, they said, well, we're not going to make you ruin another set of sampling so you can do yours, then that sampling's going to be out of compliance. So okay, fine, end of February. And then we had to scramble to get a access agreement in order to take those samples, where we got it signed the day of our required sampling. So lots of challenges that we didn't see coming that don't come up in normal sampling, and just in terms of a cost and time aspect from the sampling team, everything took about twice as long as it usually does, because you have to be extra careful. You have to make sure that every person on the team washed their clothes that day and didn't use fabric softener, and if they did, or if they didn't know, you had to send them home. Because if you had somebody who accidentally used something with PFAS in it show up to the job site, that could give you false positives. So in terms of results, we haven't got the groundwater sampling back yet. We just did it a couple weeks ago. But our soil samples at our heavily usage area, we're in the 5 to 100 parts per trillion range. And my team and I, we got the results and we looked at it, and then we looked at each other and we said, is this good? Is this high? Is this low? We're so used to having screening levels from the DTSC and the EPA and then the local agencies. And we looked at each other like, we have nothing to compare these numbers to. So yeah, we just looked at each other and okay, put them in a table and mark them all green, because no exceedances, because there's nothing to compare it to. So we were laughing about that. But what makes us nervous is we have to report this data and have to make it public, and the water boards really haven't given us a next step. They're saying, oh, just do the investigations and we'll figure out what we want to do after you do those. So we're kind of stuck. We have the data, and we're kind of at mercy of the agencies and the public on what to do with it next. So we'll see what happens.
Thank you. And so obviously that's where the legal side of the equation comes. We're going to get information out there now that's public with respect to this. It will have implications for the California Environmental Quality Act, clearly. PFAS is not within the hazardous substance definition. Nevertheless, we anticipate that EIRs that go out now will have to talk about PFAS. It's hard because we don't have thresholds of significance yet for purposes of CEQA. Nevertheless, there are a number of cases that indicate that if you have something like this emerging, you have to talk about it. You have to define it. You have to define the health risks. So the legal community is struggling with this emerging topic and how to handle it in environmental impact reports. For those airports that are going through infrastructure improvement projects over the next year or two, you will have to struggle with that along with everybody else. So I recommend that you stay close to the vest in terms of regulatory and legal developments. I'm sure that there will be a number of cases that will be emerging from this. The other thing airports are doing is they're scrambling to put PFAS in a lot of the leases in terms of who the responsible party is for remediation. A lot of leases already have for FBOs pretty broad provisions for hazardous substances, cleanup requirements, cleanup responsibilities. We're seeing amendments to a lot of leases to add PFAS to things like that, with the full knowledge that nobody really knows how these contribution lawsuits will go. The other thing that some airports are doing is they're kind of stockpiling the PFAS foam, only using it when absolutely necessary, not in non-emergency situations, with the hope and expectation that they potentially will be a buyback program at some point, and they can get that PFAS bought back. So they're kind of stockpiling it for those purposes. I do know that FAA has expedited trying to get something else out there for airports to utilize, but until they do, obviously there is still the importance of keeping this foam and requiring it. Let's see, make sure I covered. Oh, and then the other thing, there's been a couple of airports who have had FBOs have accidental foam that has been released. And so, again, it kind of brings to attention to airports that they need to get knowledge out to the FBOs. They need to get knowledge out to all the users on the airport in terms of what's happening with this PFAS, what's happening with potential remediation. And communities are becoming aware of this situation. You know, noise, air quality, all of those issues are important, but now they have this new environmental concern that has spread like wildfire to the community. So at community meetings, we're seeing people bring this issue up. They want to know if the airports have been testing. They want to know what the test results are. So I recommend that everybody stay very close to their legal counsel on this. There will be important developments over the next year for sure, in terms of how to best protect yourself, how to spread the costs of potential remediation. So we'll see as we go downstream what happens. And Christine, I don't know how we're doing on time, but hopefully we have time for some questions if anybody has
Plenty of
additional
time.
questions.
And why don't, I will try and pass it around, but maybe you can repeat the question.
Absolutely.
If, start back here with Carol.
Okay.
So, Lori, I was very interested to hear that at community meetings, the public is bringing this up.
Uh-huh.
Can we ask them, how do they know they're not contaminating themselves with their Teflon pans and their fabric softener? I mean, I'm not going to be too frightened of the airport if I'm using these products at home.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is one of the, did everybody hear that question? Okay. That's one of the major challenges with PFAS. It's a mixture of so many different chemicals. And like Chris said, you can contaminate easily in terms of a sampling. So, right now, airports are really responding with not enough information. But as we go downstream and as the water boards establish thresholds, there will be an onus on airports to ensure that we do testing that is viable. And then those results will be out in the community. Yes, absolutely. Do you have anything to add to that? Okay.
So I have a question for the panel, or maybe anybody else in the room, but has there been any official law that has exempted airports from liability from use of the federal requirement?
Absolutely
I know
not.
there was efforts in the House, but I didn't know if it was official.
No. And, I think airports are kind of putting themselves in various positions with respect to who may be responsible parties. Obviously, we have some mandates from the federal government to utilize the PFAS foam. Nevertheless, there obviously are broad tentacles in terms of who the responsible parties might be once we get to cleanup issues.
Yes. So when I was dealing with PFAS, I was dealing with the Los Angeles Regional Water Board, and they seemed to be very understanding of the situation, and they extended the deadlines, and this is when I was working for Ventura County. But one of the things that they wanted to test is wherever you were storing the the chemicals, the PFAS. That's where they wanted to dig as well, even though they may not have been any discharges there. And they wanted to do the same thing at the FBOs. If the hangars contained, even though there was no proof that there was a discharge, they wanted to see it. But one of the things that they asked for is they asked for historical crashes and where you have tested the PFAS, where you have trained with PFAS, and obviously where the crashes are. One of the things that I think they were trying to do, and I don't think I heard it mentioned, is that if you have any type of testing right now, you can actually bring somebody from the outside as a contractor so they can do and test your vehicles, your ARF vehicles, on site without contaminating the environment, I guess. But that was going to be really expensive, so I don't know what the experience in this room is, but I think there's an opportunity to potentially talk about that too.
Yeah, so Sarah mentioned the FAA was building a research facility, our research facility, that has been completed and testing is underway now. So once we come up with a fluorine-free alternative, then we'll adopt it. So I just want to give everybody an update on that in case they're wondering.
Thank you.
Chris Morello's.
Just a few things too. As a non-hub, we're working through this issue as well. We have our work plan adopted or accepted by the Water Board. They took extra time to do it, but then gave us the go-ahead right before the holidays, so we lost about 30 days with that process. But they also have been very, as Jorge said, they have been very communicative and helpful through the process. And some of the things that of note, and as we've talked about the cross-contamination that they made us aware of were first, one of the first things up were the public use water facilities across the state, and they were testing those. And they said that over 50% had false positives because of cross-contamination. And those results went out, obviously, and then had to be redacted and redone. So that cross-contamination is a real issue. And one of the other things is if you're doing multiple soil samples and water samples on your site, how do you clean the equipment in between is really important, because you could bring it from one location to another and it could appear that your whole site has contamination, but that won't necessarily be true. It could be because of the equipment you're using not being cleaned appropriately, so you have to test the water before. Where are you going to wash it? You have to think it all through prior to getting out to doing the testing. So just some notes of things we're hearing and seeing already.
Yeah. Thank you.
Dave?
Well, this has been kind of interesting. I attended an environmental workshop in Washington, D.C. through the Airports Consultant Council. And during that presentation, it was much different. We all walked out of that with our eyes wide open going, oh man, this is the second coming of asbestos. And it's nice to see that it's starting to work through the process and understanding how to test and what to watch out for and cross-contamination. But other things that they were concerned about is the constant certification of our facilities and having to test their equipment. And that rolled over into, well, now that your equipment is contaminated, can it be uncontaminated? And that initial assessment was no. So you get rid of the foam, but your equipment now has to be replaced. So it is a far-reaching issue that again, you need to take a step back for, and it seems, but it is if they still have to train with this stuff, how do you control that, and how often can you not train with it and still be certified with it? So those were issues that they were talking about before.
I'll say one thing about that, just from the Ontario perspective. Ontario recently purchased 2 new crash trucks that have the ability to kind of self-certify without discharging. So that's one way it's going. They also have new devices that can certify the crash trucks and other dispensing equipment with foam that doesn't have PFAS in it and can circulate it and recapture it for a no discharge. So they're working on that front. I will say that the truck's self-certifying system has been a bit of a pain. So when it's solved in one problem has become a different problem, but there are equipment and people looking into that topic.
Yes.
I have a question to follow these, but I wanted to touch on Mark's point. The FAA has approved 3 systems for no foam testing. We have installed one on our vehicles at Contra Costa County. It is a pain to get it started, but once you've got it dialed in, it seems to work relatively well. The FAA was really quick at giving us that technology, so that's something that all your airports should look at if you have trucks. We ran into the same problem with cleaning the trucks because we changed from the C8 to the C6 chain. You didn't talk much about that, but it's a little better, but not good. So we had that whole process. Buying the equipment for our 3 trucks cost us $44,000 to do the no foam testing. It was $26,000 to change out the foam without even really being a benefit. So those are the ancillary costs that you're going to run into. But my question, you mentioned that they're going to start charging airports for their time. Is the council going to push against that? Because they are already asking airports to do their testing for them, and now they're going to charge us to do their testing for them.
So we actually did. When they sent out the original investigation order, they started asking airports to create cost recovery accounts. And obviously, if they're the ones requesting the investigation, they shouldn't be charging the airports to pay for that investigation. So they did back off of charging airports for that initial piece, but if they ask for any additional investigation beyond what they are asking for now, which we expect that's going to come down the pipeline once more results come in, they can charge you for that piece that goes beyond what the state originally requested. So we just want to make sure that everyone's aware right now. They're not charging now, but fully expect that they will start charging in the future, if there are any future iterations.
One other thing to add on that, if it gets added as a CERCLA chemical, and then all of a sudden anything with PFAS becomes hazardous waste, the California agencies have all the regulatory tools they need to charge you for their work on hazardous waste sites.
And I have a question about how far down to the small airports is this going to go? It's like Salinas is, I mean, our city has a truck, so does that mean we have to do testing?
That's a really great question. I think the State Water Board is actually still trying to figure that out. When we met with them, they actually asked us to give recommendations for who they should go talk to next, which we didn't. It's okay. But there's still there's very huge learning curve that's going on right now. So if you have an ARF truck at your airport, I think it's only a matter of time again until they begin to connect those dots. But I think they're still just going through that phase 1 process right now, and it's still wait and see.
Actually, thank you very much. That's a good presentation, by the way. I got 2 questions. One, is there any initiatives to get some, in Congress, to get some funding support for airports to help with this issue? And number 2, it's my understanding that military airfields, their ARF operations are no longer requiring PFAS. You know, why at Part 139 airports do we get shot with that PFAS bullet, and the military airfields don't?
Well, regarding the Congress question, I think last year it was more of we were on the offense with everything that was coming out, but I think that should absolutely be a part of the dialogue going into this year, figuring out how we can work together and support airports through this process, because again, it's not like airports went out by choice and decided to use this product. It was federally mandated. You're required to use it, so therefore there should be some sort of assistance to help airports through the process. Not quite sure if you guys have an answer.
Yeah, Sarah didn't actually address this issue, but she was involved in a conference call between Los Angeles and SFO, where we were talking to Senator Feinstein's office as it related to this particular issue, and they did want to have a right on a sea community from the airport's perspective, and as well as addressing this particular issue in California. But I will convey to the room that the very first line that the Sarah's laughing
I wasn't
because
gonna bring it up.
and I just want to let you know what the temperament is. So the person indicated and started with, so let me get this straight. You, the airports, are okay with having us have this in our water system to kill millions of children. So that was where the temperament was gonna go already. So everybody else was kind of like on the phone, pretty much backed off. No, we're not okay with killing, millions of people. So this is gonna be a challenge with respect to trying to basically getting that legislation. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
I think, yes, so that is a good takeaway for if you take anything away from this conversation is please be careful about how you approach this conversation with your regulators, whether on the state or the federal level, because there are serious health impacts. This is an emotional topic. And so no matter whether or not you have concerns about it, when we walked into that discussion, we never said we were opposed to anything. And we never said, PFAS needs to stay. We were just voicing we have concerns because airports are in a gray area if you make this a hazardous substance. But as you can see from that response, just because this is such an emotional issue, it went in a completely different direction. So please, please be careful when you go out in public and talk to people about this, about how you phrase things and what you were saying.
It sounds like they put you on the defensive before you even, and that's yep, that's what happens. Yes, I'm sorry.
I just had a question regarding, if there is an air crash and you have to use, the foam, the aqueous film, or AFFF, what's the best practice to clean that up? Do you bring a hazmat team in to clean that as best as possible and get as much out of there as possible, or what do you do? And then also, I've talked to our fire department, and when they go and have an engine fire, like an automobile engine fire on the side of the freeway, they're also using foam, and that's going into a storm drain, and it's also contaminating. And so I don't know why they're targeting airports specifically, because there's other uses for this foam, and it seems to be in everything. So I guess my question was also a comment, but what is the best practice to clean this up once it is used?
So on the cleanup side, it's definitely still in the rulemaking process on determining what the safe levels are, or what level do you have to get down to before your site is clean. For all the other contaminants, so let's say hydrocarbons, that if you have a plane crash, you've got the jet fuel on the ground, and now you've got PFAS. There are very well-established levels of what concentration you have to clean down to. So you remove soil, you sample outside what you removed, and you say, oh, I'm below 10 parts per billion total TPH. Okay, that's clean on the hydrocarbon side. However, for PFAS, there's no number. So when you say, what are the best practices, do you clean down till you get non-detect in every sample, and now you have the cross-contamination issues. So these are the things that are being hammered out, and it's why it's so confusing on what airports are actually supposed to do, because you can't just let the plane burn. So now you have discharged PFAS onto soil, most likely, or into a storm drain, and there's no legal criteria on what you need to clean it up to. So it's to answer your question, the best practices are clean more than you'd think, but don't set a numeric level that you have to get down to. Say the plume was X size, we went to X times 1.2, scooped everything out, sent it off site, we're good to go. That, people are gonna challenge that because it's such a gray area, but there's no specific guidance you can point to say this is what I have to clean to, and this makes it safe.
So did you say DTSC was involved with this process?
So my understanding is right now, PFAS is not
You don't.
category, like if it's in soil or anything, it's not categorized as hazardous waste.
So you don't get a manifest.
So DTSC is not involved yet. I wouldn't be surprised if it's added to the circular list in the next couple of years, which then DTSC will be involved.
Because if we over excavate and send it off site, how do you know if it's been disposed of properly? Because normally you incinerate, but if it
Right.
is forever and it goes in the air,
So if
how do
it's
they do it?
If it's training and you accidentally spill some, then there's no good guidance on what you're supposed to do. And proper treatment, I showed that pie graph of all the different options. We're still figuring out which one's the best and most cost effective. What if it's a crash and you've got like a commingled plume or multiple contaminants, then you'd basically ship it off based on those other contaminants. So if you're over the TPH limit, then you dispose it that way for incineration or evaporation before final disposal. But in terms of the PFAS, those disposal facilities don't have a number to get down to either. So they don't really know what to clean it down to as well. So it's, again, these are the numbers and the distinctions that they're still trying to hammer out on the regulatory side, and whatever number they pick is going to be, since it's moving so quickly and it's emerging and it's a public issue now, it may be very tough, or it may be kind of a dart throw and determine exactly what the level should be.
Yeah, this is a really rough topic, but thanks for covering it.
Still more questions, and we have the time. Let me go over to John only because he hasn't weighed in yet.
Just to go back to the funding issue, we all know that right now the state does not have any money to support this. Most of us also know that the state is out of compliance with the FAA's aviation fuel tax revenue policy by the tune of $100 million a year or so that could go to something like this. And there are a number of people who are working on that, Sarah and Jim and Carol, Mark and I and some other people who are working on that. And it's a question yet to be decided. But the money's there if it was just going to where it was required to go by law.
Thanks, John.
Very valid point.
I was thinking John might actually cover what I was about to say. The California legislature, I believe one of the representatives introduced a bill to eliminate some of our disposal capabilities. They wanted to eliminate incineration, and I believe some other methods. Do you know if that passed or anything about that?
Sorry, not.
It was Scott Wiener that, from San Francisco that introduced the bill. I didn't see. I just saw that it was introduced. I didn't see if it went anywhere.
But I'm hearing they'll look into. Yeah, great. Okay.
Very interesting, but we're required to wear fireproof clothing at work, flash suits that protect you from explosions that would otherwise kill you or burn you very bad, and they're treated with the FOSS, and so the concern is more how dangerous is it compared to what they're protecting. And I don't see that in any balance here at all, because if you're going to be cross-contaminating everything with the clothing you're wearing, you're probably taking in more than you'll ever get out of the water. So there's something about killing 1 million children that just doesn't make sense to me here.
Okay, thank you. Any other, and I think part of what you're saying, and going back to that initial action, put you on the defense, is this is a societal issue, and try and frame it as quickly as you can. Yes, we're concerned and we're working on it, but try and put it in context as quickly as you can. Would be one of the things as a facilitator, I would say. Looks like, okay, Scotty, one last. Boy, I think if there was an award for most questions and interests, this may take the cake. So that's great, Scotty.
So I manage a former Air Force base, and before PFAS became known as PFAS within the civil community, I had Air Force people digging up all over my airport and explaining what this was all about. Fortunately for us, they're at least kind of taking responsibility for that. But boy, I'll tell you what, you know, when you talk about the perfect storm, I have a fire training center that they had used back in the Air Force days. I have 2 domestic water wells. I mean, it's just all over the place and very unique circumstance. And forgive me, I had to step out a little while ago, but did anybody ever mention that there's PFAS in some of the hangar fire systems? Because that's also becoming of concern to people. Both, not only it's there, we have accidental discharges, you have to test it when you put it in, and it's very difficult to clean out of those systems when you have to deal with that.
Thank you. Well, with that, Sarah and Lori, Chris, thank you so much. Really good. I would say probably next year this could be a contender for the continuing saga. So stay tuned and I guess fasten your seatbelts. But thank you very much, panel. Appreciate it. And donations are made to a local foundation. I have to look it up, but I think in Salinas, there's a local donation SWAHI makes on behalf of each of the speakers. So with that, just a couple announcements. I know there was a question about the access code for wireless. It is, and it should be on the table tent, but it's 2020 SWAHI, all one word, all caps, on the SWAHI, and that will give you access. If you are an attorney, a number of you have signed up for MCLE. We're doing it through Solano County Bar Association this year. Thank you, Bernadette. And with that, we've got 15-minute break, and we'll reconvene just about 10:15.